Ferdinand Marcos. Just saying the name, it sparks such a visceral reaction for so many in the Philippines.
It really does.
You hear about these huge infrastructure projects, right? A vision for a modern nation.
Taking shape.
But almost immediately, that clashes with something much darker. You feel this heavy weight, the secrets, the abuses of his regime.
It's a period of Philippine history that's just defined by that incredibly sharp contrast, isn't it? You have this leader credited with, significant development, building things.
Right.
Yet at the same time, he's accused of profound human rights violations and just staggering corruption.
Understanding that duality, that contradiction, it feels key to getting why it all still matters so much today.
Absolutely. It's fundamental to grasping the lasting impact.
And that's exactly what we're going to try and unpack in this deep dive. We're focusing on Ferdinand Marcos, how he rose to power.
Right.
That pivotal moment, the declaration of martial law in 1972. And we really want to get into the less visible parts of his rule.
The hidden aspects.
Yeah, the immense wealth that was apparently accumulated and the stories, the human rights abuses that still resonate so deeply today. We've gathered quite a range of sources to help us explore this complex history for you.
And our aim here is really to give you a clear, a thorough understanding, but without making it feel overwhelming. It's a really multifaceted story.
Yeah.
But we'll try to highlight the crucial bits and how they connect.
Okay, great. So let's start maybe at the beginning. Ferdinand Marcos, born 1917, Surat, Ilocos Norte.
That's right.
Becomes a lawyer, then a congressman. And pretty significantly, he really pushed this image of himself as a decorated war hero.
Yes, that war record.
Yeah.
It was central to his early political image, definitely. Though, actually, it's faced considerable historical debate,
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But regardless of the debate around the medals, his political skills were pretty evident early on. He managed to cultivate this really powerful connection with many Filipino people using a kind of populist message.
And that connection, that populist appeal, it must have played a big role in him getting elected president in 1965.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his first term, it did see this real push for economic growth, didn't it? A lot of focus on building up the nation's infrastructure, roads, bridges, things people could see.
That initial period, that progress, it's undeniable. There were tangible achievements. However, it's fascinating to observe this shift. Subtle at first maybe, but significant after he got reelected in '69.
How so?
It's almost like that drive for development started to get tangled up with a growing desire for tighter control, an ambition that, would eventually reshape the entire country.
Which brings us inevitably to that really critical date, September 21st, 1972.
Martial law.
The declaration of martial law.
Yeah.
Those three words, they still carry so much weight in the Philippines today. What was the official line? What did Marcos tell people?
Well, officially, the rationale presented was the escalating threat of communist insurgency, and also a kind of general breakdown of social order. The narrative was basically the nation's on the verge of chaos. We need decisive, absolute action to restore stability, stop it all collapsing.
But what martial law actually allowed him to do, that was pretty extreme, wasn't it?
Oh, completely.
He could essentially just rule by decree, rip up the existing structures, silence anyone who disagreed.
Exactly. The declaration was the mechanism, really, to consolidate all power into his hands. The normal checks and balances you'd expect in a democracy.
Gone.
Effectively suspended, yeah. And that opened the door for very specific actions, all aimed at cementing his control.
Like suspending habeas corpus. For you listening, what did that actually mean on the ground?
It meant the government could just detain people without needing to give a legal reason, without presenting charges.
Wow.
And the impact was immediate, and it was widespread. Thousands of people, activists, journalists, political rivals, just arrested, imprisoned, often with no clear legal process, no end date in sight.
And just getting information out, getting news, that stopped too, right? Censorship basically became the rule.
Absolutely. Media outlets that were critical, they were either shut down completely or put under really heavy censorship. And at the same time, the government used state-controlled media as this powerful propaganda machine, carefully crafting this narrative that, justified what they were doing, presented Marcos as the only one who could lead.
And the military, their role must have changed massively during this time.
Huge transformation.
Yeah.
The armed forces of the Philippines, they were given these sweeping powers. They essentially became the regime's enforcer.
So they could detain people.
Detain, torture, even execute people who were just perceived as threats to the state. It created this climate of just pervasive fear. It effectively shut down most dissent.
It's such a chilling gap, isn't it, between the official justification, saving the nation, and the reality for so many Filipinos. The critical view, the counter-argument, it paints a very different picture of his motives.
Yes, the prevailing view. And it's backed by a lot of evidence, countless testimonies from victims. It basically argues that those stated reasons for martial law, they were largely a pretext, a cover story.
So what were the real drivers, according to that view?
Well, it's argued the true goals were, 1, to get around the constitutional term limit so he could stay in power indefinitely. 2, to amass this extraordinary personal fortune. And 3, to just ruthlessly crush anyone or any group that might challenge his authority.
And speaking of that extraordinary fortune, the numbers you hear thrown around are just, well, they're mind-boggling. People talk about an alleged illicit fortune possibly over $10 billion. How? How does someone even start to accumulate that much while leading a country?
It wasn't haphazard. It was quite systematic, deeply embedded in how the government operated. One key method was manipulating government contracts.
Right.
Marcos and his inner circle, they controlled who got the major infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, big public buildings. By inflating the cost, doing these hidden deals, huge amounts of public money were just siphoned off for personal gain.
So it wasn't just like taking a small percentage, it was about controlling the whole system to benefit themselves.
Precisely. And that control reached right into key parts of the Philippine economy. The regime built up this dominant position in major industries, oil, mining, banking. This meant they could push economic policies, shape business practices in ways that directly benefited their own holdings. It created this whole network of businesses that owed them favors, or were essentially controlled by them.
And then there's the whole almost legendary aspect of the overseas accounts.
Yeah.
Secret money hidden away in foreign banks.
Yeah, and that's where the sheer scale of the alleged corruption becomes truly staggering. After Marcos was ousted, investigations started turning up huge sums of money.
Where?
Held in secret bank accounts, hidden through these really complex networks of shell corporations, especially in places like Switzerland. It shows a really sophisticated operation to hide and launder illegally acquired wealth using the global financial system.
The financial side is one thing, astounding as it is, but it's the human cost of this era that's just devastating. The widespread human rights violations.
Yeah.
We really have to confront that in this deep dive.
We do. It's crucial. Under the banner of martial law, the power of the state was weaponized against its own people, systematically, brutally. The impact on countless Filipino lives was just profound, and it's lasted for generations.
And the kinds of abuse, horrific. Torture wasn't just like a whispered rumor. It was documented, widespread practice.
The testimonies from survivors are harrowing. They detail just appalling acts of physical and psychological torture, beatings, electric shocks, waterboarding, sleep deprivation, all sorts of psychological manipulations.
It's awful.
These were used almost routinely to get information, force confessions, or just break the spirit of people they detained. And tragically, so many of these people were never even formally charged with a crime.
And beyond the direct torture, there were the killings, right? Extrajudicial killings.
Yeah.
And the disappearances. People just vanishing, leaving families with nothing but pain and questions.
Yes. The summary execution just killing people perceived as political opponents, especially anyone suspected of ties to communist movements, that became a terrifying reality. And the disappearances. They inflicted this unique kind of agony, leaving families stuck in this limbo of not knowing, unable to get closure, sometimes never even finding the bodies of their loved ones. These weren't just isolated incidents. It points to a systemic pattern of state-sanctioned violence.
And it's so important to stress, isn't it, that these abuses weren't just aimed at high-profile political figures. It reached down to ordinary Filipinos, too, including, vulnerable people like women and children.
That's a really crucial point to emphasize. The climate of fear, the impunity that martial law created, it seeped into every level of society. Pretty much anyone could become vulnerable to the regime's arbitrary power.
And then in the midst of all this, you have Imelda Marcos. She became this almost larger-than-life symbol of the regime's unbelievable excesses, didn't she?
She absolutely did. Her famously extravagant lifestyle is such a stark, jarring contrast to the poverty so many Filipinos were living in.
Right.
Her huge collections of jewelry, designer clothes, and those opulent public works projects she championed, like the grand makeover of Malacanang Palace, building the cultural center.
Yeah.
They all became really potent symbols of that massive disconnect.
And And, you have to mention the shoes.
The shoes.
The legendary collection, over 1,000 pairs. It sounds almost surreal, that level of excess, but it was real, and it became such a powerful symbol.
That shoe collection, it became this enduring image, didn't it? Representing the sheer scale of the family's wealth and, well, extravagance, right in the face of national hardship.
Yeah.
But it's really important to remember Imelda's role wasn't just about shopping. She was deeply involved in the family's financial dealings.
Oh, really?
Yeah, wielding significant influence over government contracts, actively using state resources for her own projects, and allegedly personal enrichment. She wasn't just a bystander.
Okay, so the story takes this major turn, doesn't it, with the assassination of Benigno Aquino Jr. in 1983. That felt like a real lightning rod.
It absolutely was a pivotal moment. Aquino coming back from exile and then being shot dead right on the tarmac.
Yeah.
It just ignited this massive public outcry.
Mm-hmm.
It really serves as a powerful unifying force for the opposition movement. It galvanized a level of resistance that hadn't quite coalesced before. The sheer grief and anger over his death, that was a crucial turning point.
In that anger, that mobilization, it ultimately led to the People Power Revolution in 1986, which is still such an inspiring story, a mostly peaceful uprising overthrowing a dictator.
It really is remarkable. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos just flooded the streets, EDSA highway especially, in this incredible display of nonviolent defiance. They were demanding an end to the Marcos regime.
And crucially, they weren't alone.
No. The support from key elements within the military who defected, and the huge moral authority of the Catholic Church. That support proved absolutely decisive. It was just an amazing testament to the power of people acting together.
And it worked. Marcos and his family were forced out into exile in Hawaii. But the aftermath, trying to recover all that allegedly stolen wealth, trying to get justice for the human rights abuses, that feels like it's still very much an ongoing story with a lot left unresolved.
It absolutely is. I mean, investigations were launched. Some of the Marcos family's assets were indeed recovered or frozen.
Right.
But a huge portion is believed to still be unaccounted for, hidden away. And similarly, while there have been efforts, laws passed, to acknowledge and compensate victims of the human rights abuses, many cases remain unresolved. There's still this lingering sense of injustice for many. And it's left behind a really complex legal and emotional landscape.
And fascinatingly, the Marcos family's influence didn't just vanish when they went into exile, did it? We've seen them steadily rebuild their political presence.
Not at all.
Culminating, of course, in Ferdinand Marcos Jr. holding the presidency today.
That continued political prominence, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the complexities of historical memory in the Philippines, the enduring power of political dynasties and legacies. It really underscores how deeply this period, the Marcos era, is still being felt and debated.
And it really highlights just how contentious it all remains. You still hear very different takes on it. You hear that narrative emphasizing stability, the development during martial law, especially in certain regions or among families who were always loyal supporters.
That's very true for some people, but particularly maybe in rural areas or those who still feel a strong loyalty to the Marcos name. There is a tendency to focus on the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, and a perceived sense of order during that time.
Yeah.
But, it's just vital to keep acknowledging the documented realities alongside that, the widespread abuse of power, the tragic loss of life, and the sheer scale of the hidden wealth that, well, continues to have real implications for the country's progress even now.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, we've looked at Marcos's authoritarian rise, the nuts and bolts of martial law that gave him such total control, the almost unbelievable scale of the alleged corruption, and maybe most importantly, the profoundly tragic human cost of his years in power.
And as we've touched on the full extent of those dark secrets, as you called them earlier, we might never fully uncover everything. The Marcos era, it just remains this deeply significant, incredibly complex chapter in Philippine history, and one that's clearly still shaping the nation's path forward.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? When you consider all those complexities, those stark contradictions of the Marcos years, what are the really long-term consequences for a country that's still grappling with that past while trying to navigate its present and build its future? How does a society even begin to reconcile those narratives of progress, the buildings and roads, with such well-documented, widespread abuses of power? It's certainly a question that gives you pause.